Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Day 15 of hearings in Tranche 1, Phase 2 at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. My name is Neil Fernandez, and I am the hearings manager. For those of you in the virtual hearing room, please turn off both your camera and microphone unless you're invited to speak by the chairman, as Zoom will pick up on all noises and you will be on screen. I now hand over to the chairman, Sir John Mitting, to formally start proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. We're going to begin today by a summary of the evidence of two undercover officers by Ms. Monaghan. When she has finished that, there will be a break to permit the technology to be rearranged, and we will then embark on live evidence from HN 126. I'm going to ask, first of all, that the usual recording is made earlier, and this applies to the stage at which live evidence is being given, not to the stage at which Ms. Monaghan is summarising the evidence of officers, which will be broadcast live. May the recording be played, please. I am conducting this inquiry under a statute, the Inquiries Act 2005, which gives me the power to make orders regulating the conduct of the inquiry, including its hearings. In the exercise of that power, I have made a number of orders which affect what you may and may not do in the hearing rooms and after you leave them. Breach of any of the orders is a serious matter and may have serious consequences for you. If I am satisfied that a person may have breached an order, I have the power to certify the matter to the High Court, which will investigate and deal with it as if it had been a contempt of that court. If satisfied that a breach has occurred and merits the imposition of a penalty, the High Court may impose a severe sanction on the person in breach, including a fine, imprisonment for up to 2 years, and sequestration of their assets. Evidence is going to be given live over screens in the hearing rooms. It is strictly prohibited to photograph or record what is shown on the screens or to record what is said by a witness or anyone else in the hearing rooms. You may bring your mobile telephone into the hearing rooms, but you may not use it for any of those purposes. You may use it silently for any other purpose. In particular, you may transmit your account of what you have seen and heard in a hearing room to any other person, but only once at least 10 minutes have elapsed since the event which you are describing took place. This restriction has a purpose. In the course of the inquiry, I have made orders prohibiting the public disclosure of information, for example, about the identity of a person for a variety of reasons. These orders must be upheld. It is inevitable that whether by accident or design, information which I have ordered should not be publicly disclosed will sometimes be disclosed in a hearing. If and when that happens, I will immediately suspend the hearing and make an order prohibiting further disclosure of the information outside the hearing rooms. The consequence will be that no further disclosure of that information may be made by mobile telephone or other portable electronic device from within the hearing room or by any means outside it. I am sorry if you find this message alarming. It is not intended to be. Its purpose is simply to ensure that everyone knows the rules which must apply if I am to hear the evidence which I need to enable me to get to the truth about undercover policing. You, as members of the public, are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear and to reach your own conclusions about it. The inquiry team will do their best to ensure that you can. If you have any doubt about the terms of this message or what you may or may not do, you should not hesitate to ask one of them, and with my help if necessary, they will provide you with the answer. Ms. Monaghan.
Thank you, sir. HN80. Publication of the real name of HN80, Colin Clark, is restricted. He has provided the inquiry with a signed witness statement, but has been excused from giving oral evidence for health reasons. HN80 infiltrated the Socialist Workers' Party, or SWP, primarily in North London, from March 1977 onwards. He began within the Seven Sisters branch, which appears to have merged with or become the Haringey branch, and then became involved with the Lee Valley district of that organisation and the Right to Work campaign. HN80 held the position of treasurer at all these levels of the SWP. To a lesser extent, HN80 also reported on the Anti-Nazi League, or ANL. His deployment ended in March 1982. Rick Clark, HN297, told HN80 about the SDS and encouraged him to be put forward as a UCO. HN80 spent 3 months in the SDS back office before entering the field, during which time he grew his hair and a beard and dressed down. He was deployed on the 17th of March, 1977. HN80 states that the practice of using the identities of deceased children distressed him, and as he knew that it would cause distress to the family of the child if it were discovered, he refused to adopt it. Instead, he obtained a death certificate for a Paul Clark, but used the forename Colin. He wanted to use his own date of birth, to which his managers assented. But due to what HN80 describes as a problem with the system, the cover documents were issued with a different birth date. Prior to deployment, he recalls being spoken to by Mike Ferguson, Jeff Craft, and HN68, all of whom he describes as excellent management staff. He recalls Jeff Craft, during a particularly lengthy discussion, tasking him to collect information on, quote, extreme left-wing activists and groups in order to protect the public in London, to help the MPS to police demonstrations, and to assist MI5 in its counter-subversion role. He contrasts the discretion he had in the SDS to determine the type of information he provided with the more prescriptive approach to intelligence gathering in Special Branch. He had no formal training and received no specific guidance on matters such as forming relationships with group members and involvement in criminality. He asserts that his strong family values obviated the need for guidance on forming sexual relationships, and that his backstory, that he was involved in a long-term, long-distance relationship with an air hostess from New Zealand, was constructed to forestall romantic advances from group members. Married with a young child at the time of joining the SDS, he states that nobody from management spoke to his wife before he joined or afterwards. HN80 found cover employment as a mechanic working in a garage somewhere in Wood Green, but he left after a couple of months to go freelance doing vehicle repairs, for which he charged only the cost of parts and no fee. HN80 had a passport in its cover name. At the beginning of his deployment, HN80 states that he attended meetings at the SDS safe flats twice a week, where he put in his expenses and reports, which he typed up at home, and where he could speak to senior management. Occasionally, he would put together a consolidated report with other officers, make identifications from photographs, and deconflict which officers would go to certain events. Later in his deployment, a lack of time meant he attended SDS meetings only once a week. HN80 disliked the bi-weekly meetings as he felt that a dozen or so individuals converging on a flat on a regular basis was likely to attract unwanted attention and put his cover identity at risk. He recalls that on occasion, UCOs and managers met socially, where they would discuss sports, their personal lives, and events in London or nationally, rather than their deployments. HN80 would call into the office on a daily basis, except on weekends. And if particularly urgent matters arose, it was possible to contact managers at home. He had cover accommodation in North London, as his managers deemed it, quote, a good place to be based in order to make contact with the more important individuals on the extreme left wing. and he was directed to obtain information generally on groups in this political arena. Conversation with an SWP paper seller, who was keen to recruit, provided an opening for HN80, and he was eventually invited to an SWP meeting in May 1977. In addition to his infiltration of the Seven Sisters and Haringey branches of the SWP, HN80 had some dealings with the Tottenham branch. The first reports, in which HN80 is named in his cover identity, date from October 1977 and concern meetings held in September of that year. Some early reports from HN80, dated mid to late 1977, contain details of members of the Seven Sisters branch, including physical descriptions, race, children, occupations, vehicles, union affiliations, and living arrangements. HN80 disputes authorship of reports from April and August 1980, which relay private sexual and medical information on the basis that he would not have regarded the health of individuals as significant for reporting. Concerning reports on talks on women and fascism and what is sexism, HN80 recalls that while the talks themselves may not have been worth reporting, quote, the attendance lists were of greater relevance to Special Branch. And he provides a similar rationale for recording the names of attendees at a Women's Voice fundraising evening. HN80 was also able to submit regular copies of the weekly information sheets prepared by the SWP Central Committee for restricted circulation and handed out to members at meetings, and which, he comments, provided useful information about future events. In 1977, HN80 also provided reporting on the build-up to and aftermath of the events of the 13th of August in Lewisham, including a threat made by the neo-Nazi group Column 88 to burn down the house of an SWP Central Committee member. In that year, he also started to report on the newly established ANL. Regarding a report on an ANL carnival in 1978, listing 229 attendees, HN80 asserts that the group, quote, was known to use violence and seek out confrontation. It was important to know where its support came from and was likely to come from in future. HN80 also provided an 8-page report on an ANL conference in Birmingham in November 1978. A few reports touch upon matters relating to the Labour Party and the Young Liberals, including a delegate conference of the Haringey Labour Movement anti-racist, anti-fascist campaign set up by 3 North London constituency Labour parties, and a list of attendees at a Troops Out of Ireland demonstration organised by the Young Liberals. In certain reports, HN80 reports the presence of elected politicians, such as Ken Livingstone, and states that he has no recollection of ever actually reporting on them. One report suggests that HN80, along with his branch of the SWP, attended a demonstration in October 1979, protesting against police involvement in the death of Blair Peach. He believes that he may be the author of a report on a public meeting organised by Black people against state harassment. In July 1977, HN80 reported on a public meeting held by the SWP on the tactics to be used at a demonstration at the Grumwick factory. HN80 asserts that this information was of interest to Special Branch as the dispute, quote, has significant public order implications. HN80 states that as far as he knew, there was no standing instruction to report on industrial disputes unless they bore the potential for violence or disorder. HN80 often reported union affiliation and attended the founding conference for the Defend Our Unions campaign set up by the SWP. On his SWP registration form, HN80 noted that he was a member of the Amalgamated Union of Engineering Workers, which he claimed he added only to bolster his credentials. He states he joined no trade union during his deployment. On 4 consecutive years over his deployment, HN80 attended the SWP National Delegate Conference, and he recalls providing detailed reports on each one. One such report lists HN80 in his cover name as a steward with responsibility for security. HN80's evolving stature within the SWP was reflected in being trusted to lecture nationally on political standards and recruitment on behalf of the party, and to Women's Voice. By March 1980, H&80 had been appointed treasurer of the Tottenham branch of the SWP and already sat on the Lee Valley District Committee, as he recalls, by virtue of becoming treasurer at that level too. He notes that he did not actively pursue these roles, but that other members encouraged him to take them up. By July 1980, he is documented as National Treasurer of the Right to Work campaign. He states that he assisted SWP groups within the region with practical affairs only, and never sought to influence policy or activities. Although his role as district treasurer gave him a vote at district meetings, he attests that he tried to ensure that he always followed the majority. Trusted by his managers to act appropriately, he does not believe that he was required to inform them of his ascendance in the SWP. Around a week before the 1980 Right to Work March, H&80 submitted a report which detailed the logistics, finances, trade union sponsorship, and likely numbers for the march. Some months after the march, he also submitted a 12-page report containing the names and details of those who had attended, and another listing details of the school children recruited as a result of a picket of schools at the march starting point in Port Talbot. H&80 notes in a similar context, quote, "Youth was not determinative of innocence of any potential public disorder." H&80 attended the whole of the march and remembers that there was some violence at its concluding event, the picket of the Conservative Party conference. Unable, he claims, to stay on the sidelines, he was badly assaulted around the head and shoulders and struck out in self-defense. H&80 received a commendation for his actions during this incident. H&80 did not attend the 1981 march, but he is documented as present at a 7-person meeting of its organising committee. From 1981 onwards, H&80's reporting changed in focus from district branch activities to matters related to the SWP National Office and Central Committee. He states that his perceived can-do attitude led to his being asked to help out on an ad hoc basis with administrative work at SWP headquarters. He agreed and notes that while this granted him access to information he would struggle to obtain as district treasurer, it was not a specific tasking. H&80 even received an offer to join the Central Committee, but seeing the role as, quote, wholly inconsistent with his responsibilities as a deployed UCO, he believes that he said he was too busy to give up any more time. He nonetheless continued to have access to the upper echelons of the SWP and notes that his managers, quote, were a little surprised on occasions by the activists that I was able to have contact with and gaining information on, even if only fleetingly. Access to the SWP hierarchy allowed H&80 to provide considerable intelligence on the SWP's finances, membership, and organisation nationally, including an extensive international distribution list for socialist worker, SWP membership records, and bank details of those who paid their subscriptions by banker's draft, possibly documented with photographs. MI5 appears to have valued H&80's intelligence product. Notes for file from late 1981 refer to intelligence obtained by an SDS officer, likely to have been H&80, who had access to the SWP headquarters. And in a letter sent to the Deputy Assistant Commissioner regarding its debrief of him, MI5 expressed thanks for the, quote, very fruitful discussion, which had filled a number of gaps in its knowledge. H&80 does not believe that he was operating amongst subversives. He asserts that while those on whom he reported may have been strongly opposed to government policy, he believes that they were not seeking to subvert the institutions of the state. H&80 recalls that he also had peripheral contact with those on the left wing of politics who supported republicanism in Northern Ireland, including those who supported the provisional IRA. While he believes that most of the related reporting is missing from his pack, a small number of his reports touch on this topic. H&80 states that many of the reports provided in his witness pack do not reflect those he recalls submitting, a large number of which gave brief indications of likely demonstrations and public order matters and were imparted by telephone. There is also a lack of reporting dated between November 1978 and spring-summer of the following year, despite HN80's recollection of submitting reports in the normal way during this period. He notes that his pay increased considerably as a result of, quote, thousands of hours worth of overtime payments during his deployment. He states that while overtime was claimed routinely on the basis of officers' own self-reporting, there was, however, an upper ceiling on the number of overtime hours on which SDS management would sign off. HN80 recalls that he was recognizing his real identity by people selling the SWP newspaper, who found out from his wife his real home address. His immediate managers supported HN80's subsequent request to move outside the 20-mile limit, which was, however, ultimately rejected by the MPS hierarchy. He also recalls that on 3 or 4 occasions after he was withdrawn, he was approached by people who had known him his cover identity. HN80 considers SDS management to have been effective, providing practical assistance and guidance when necessary, but also notes that, quote, the MPS as an organisation ignored sensible representations about the risks. HN80 states that he witnessed violence on several occasions in the context of public disorder, from minor assaults to severe beatings. Other than the incident at the Right to Work March in 1980, where he asserts he acted in self-defence, he participated in no violent incidents. He states he was not arrested, charged, nor convicted of a criminal offence while serving undercover, and he did not appear in criminal proceedings as a witness. There is no evidence to suggest that he engaged in sexual activity while in his cover identity. HM106. HM106, who used the cover name Barry Tompkins, has provided a witness statement. A restriction order prohibits publication of his real name. He is unable to give oral evidence for health reasons. HM106 joined the police in the early 1970s. For 6 months before joining the SDS, Wilston Special Branch, he carried out plainclothes surveillance work, but had no undercover identity. He believes he was told of vacancies within the SDS, and so approached its head, Mike Ferguson. Although there was no formal interview process, discussions followed. And Mike Ferguson went to HN106's family home, where he explained to HN106 and his wife that he did not want him to join if it were likely to cause difficulties in their marriage. HN106 assumes that the SDS preferred recruiting married officers because a spouse could provide support, and probably also as it would reduce the likelihood of an undercover officer, quote, going rogue. HN106 believes he received no formal training when he joined the unit during 1978. He recalls no advice or guidance on involvement in the private lives of those he would meet undercover, or sexual relationships, but states that it would have been obvious to him that becoming sexually involved with targets was not a good idea. HN106 is not sure that the precise legal and ethical limits on officers' behaviour while undercover were spelt out. HN106 remembers receiving informal training while working in the SDS back office, where he read intelligence reports and activist literature. He describes having a reasonable level of influence over his tasking, which he saw as inevitable, given he would have to use his own common sense and judgment in the field. For his cover identity, HN106 used the name and date of birth of a deceased child. His cover background, he believes, consisted only of telling people that he was born or had lived abroad, but had come to England with his parents. He had cover employment as a delivery driver for a garden centre in Greater London, and a cover vehicle, which he sometimes used to ferry around activist contacts. He had a cover driving licence, but no passport. He also had a number of cover flats during his deployment, including one in Stoke Newington that he shared with another undercover officer, HN96. HN106 states that he would handwrite his reports either at his family home or during the twice-weekly SDS meetings, where he would hand them in. Urgent information he relayed by telephone. HN106 states that generally he passed on all the information he could recall, and understood that SDS managers would then decide which parts formally to record and to disseminate. HM 106 is unable to recall providing most of the information contained in the intelligence reports in his pack, although he disputes attribution in relation to certain groups. There are also details on reports such as immigration status or telephone subscriber information, which were outside his purview, and which he believes came from other sources and/or were added by the SDS office after he submitted his reports. HM 106 understands that officers were expected to attend at least one of the twice-weekly SDS meetings. At these, most people would provide a brief oral update about their deployments, which were also discussed in general terms, including any unusual situations. And officers would also chat and occasionally argue. SDS managers, who were usually present, would have overheard any discussions and sometimes gave advice and guidance. He recalls that he may on occasion have arranged separate meetings if there was something of importance to discuss. He would also call the office every day to let them know he was okay. HM 106 states that management directed him towards the far left wing and to look into whether groups other than those already well covered by the SDS, such as the SWP, should be targeted. To enable the police to assess a group's threat to public order, HM 106 understood that he should report on its membership and on planned protests and demonstrations. He was also expected to identify those who broke the law before, during, or after demonstrations, and to report on a group's long-term aims. HM 106 entered the field in April 1979 and suspects he would have started reporting in May of that year. The earliest report contained in his bundle is dated 30th of May 1979 and relates to a leaflet issued by the Friends of Blair Peach Committee. His bundle also contains a report listing attendees at a Blair Peach demonstration in April 1980, and another from July 1980 on efforts of the Friends of Blair Peach Committee to form a national coordinating body concerned with cases of state brutality by the police and prison authorities. HM 106 states that to the best of his recollection, he had no involvement with the Friends of Blair Peach Committee, although it is possible he came into possession of the leaflet in the early report. HM 106 disputes authorship of an intelligence report from July 1979, which lists attendees at Blair Peach's funeral, as he says he has no recollection of attending and would have been unable to name such a large number of people so early in his deployment. HM 106 states that he came across the Spartacus League, which he describes as a revolutionary Trotskyist group, because they were active in East London, where he was based. HM 106 recalls thinking the group might be of interest to the SDS after speaking with members who expressed pride at having thrown bricks at police officers during the miners' strike pickets. HM 106 assumes he became involved through buying the group's newspaper and attending their meetings. In order to gain legitimacy, he describes attending some general left-wing and Labour Party events and getting a basic knowledge of Marxist Trotskyist literature. He would also socialise with activists in the pub and in their homes. The Spartacus League is the main focus of HM 106's intelligence reports until around mid-1980. He attended their office on a couple of occasions and believes he was considered a relatively trusted supporter rather than a member. He states he did not really witness the group posing a significant challenge to public disorder. And although they sometimes gave the impression of wanting to split off from peaceful demonstrations to, quote, cause trouble elsewhere, this never really amounted to much. He believes, however, that their support for the Provisional IRA may have been of greater concern and suspects that the group would have been capable of providing low-level support to this organisation. HM 106 produced some reporting on the Revolutionary Marxist Tendency, or RMT, from mid-1980 onwards, which he believes was, quote, effectively a sister organisation to the Spartacus League. The large majority of HM 106's reporting from 1980 onwards concerned the RCT, and at the end of 1980, Workers Against Racism, or WAR, described in the reporting as a front for the RCT. The RCT changed its name to the Revolutionary Communist Group, RCG, and then to the Revolutionary Communist Party, RCP. He states that he took up no formal roles within these groups. One report on an RCT educational on Ireland, held in February 1981 and attended by 12 people, records a discussion of what unconditional support to the Irish Republican Army actually entails, with one individual asking whether it should extend to planting bombs or gun running, although this is repudiated by other members. As with the Spartacus League, HM 106 presumes the SDS wanted intelligence on the RCT, in part because of its support for the Provisional IRA. Some of the RCP reporting indicates an apparent desire to support the Irish Republican Army, and there is limited reporting on the RCP-linked Irish Freedom Movement. The intelligence report attributed to HM 106 described no significant instances of public disorder instigated by the RCT or RCP, and instead focused on the membership and on public meetings and conferences. HM 106 recalls that sometime into his deployment, he and two individuals he met through either the Spartacus League or the RMT set up a new group as a vehicle for them to voice disapproval of the way in which existing groups operated. He states that they sought no other members. HM 106 recalls that during his deployment, a KGB officer attempted to recruit him to deliver information on behalf of the Russian security service, and said that he would need to go to Russia for training. It was decided with SDS managers that his cover identity would not withstand scrutiny in Russia, so he rejected the offer, after which there was no further contact. HM 106 believes this officer to be a Russian individual recorded by him as attending two RCP meetings in 1982. A contemporaneous MI5 document records that Special Branch were, quote, totally against allowing an SDS source to become involved with such a situation. HM 106 also believes that for a number of months during his deployment, he and the two other founding members of his small group passed bits of information to an individual who may have been working for a foreign security service and who was particularly interested to know about views on apartheid, in return for sums which came to hundreds of pounds. HM 106 states that the SDS office was aware of the individual and that he was funding HM 106's group in exchange for information. In addition to WAR, HM 106 presumes he was involved with East London Workers Against Racism, or LWAR, as the reporting indicates. HM 106 believes WAR was established to recruit a broader constituency to the RCP, as many more people consider themselves to be anti-racist than communists. HM 106 recollects that he and 3 or 4 WAR members would visit families that were experiencing race-related difficulties, and to whom they would offer assistance and encouragement to become involved with WAR. One report records a visit by a delegation of 17, including a Time Out journalist, to a Walthamstow housing estate to garner physical support for a resident family subject to racial harassment by youths from the estate. It contains the names and addresses of another 3 families being helped by LWAR after suffering racist attacks. Concerning this, HM 106 states that if he came into possession of information that people were being attacked and racially abused, he would have thought this should be passed on to the police. HM 106 recalls that he was tasked by SDS managers to consider the accuracy of a Daily Mail article suggesting that WAR was a militant organisation. He thinks there was concern at the time, which was around the Brixton riots of 1981, that communist groups would try to foment disorder amongst ethnic minority groups. In fact, HM 106 formed the view that WAR did not represent much of a threat and states that its largely white RCP membership struggled easily to win the trust of ethnic minority communities, which undermined its credibility as an organisation. In relation to a report from April 1981 on an LWAR public election meeting, at which speakers apparently criticised the police for their attitude to young Black people, HM 106 says he has no recollection that reporting members' views on the police is considered especially important, but that such information might have helped in understanding the causes of the Brixton riots. One report on a WAR meeting in April 1983 relates to the group's involvement in the case of a 13-year-old, quote, West Indian boy who claimed to have been beaten up and stabbed by the police. While HM 106 states that he cannot recall the meeting, he believes that the reference in the report to whether the case could have the, quote, agitative potential of the Colin Roach incident would render information on the allegation and its perceived credibility useful to the SDS. There are also reports on a meeting of the Hackney Legal Defence Committee, on a public meeting of the Newham 8 Defence Campaign held in October 1982, featuring Gareth Pearce, of which HM 106 has no recollection, and another on Gareth Pearce acting for 6 of the 12 youths arrested during disturbances in Bradford in July 1981. HM 106 believes that he got information on a private meeting of the organising committee of the Roach Family Support Committee from the East London RCP member recorded as having attended. There are further reports attributed to HM 106 which mention Colin Roach as a result of East London RCP or LWAR support, or through the submission of a Roach Family Support Committee leaflet. HM 106's bundle also contains a report on an individual involved with the New Cross Massacre Action Committee and on a meeting of the Winston Rose Action Campaign held in August 1981, which arose from the death of Winston Rose in a police van after being restrained by officers. HM 106 says he has no recollection of these groups, nor of providing this information. In respect of the personal information about individuals in his reports, including addresses and occupations, and on occasion specific personal information, such as on family members, partners, and sexual relationships, HM 106 asserts that it would seem logical to report back information which would help identify members and regular attendees of the groups infiltrated. Some of the intelligence reports contain particularly personal information, such as the subject of the report being in a sexual relationship and suffering from cystitis, an individual's recent abortion, and reference to an RCP member's, quote, large bosom. HM 106 states that he would be surprised if he provided the information in the first 2 reports, and doubts very much that he would have included the comment in the third. The document suggests that HM 106 ceased operational duties in June 1983 and was debriefed by MI5 in July 1983, although he recalls his employment ending in the latter part of 1983. While HM 106 states that he did not join a trade union while deployed, the MI5 debrief note records him as saying that he was an inactive branch member of the Transport and General Workers Union and allowed his membership to lapse. HM 106 does not think he witnessed subversion during his deployment. He believes the left-wing communist groups lacked the degree of influence to achieve their aim of communist government in the UK, and so does not regard them as actively or effectively subversive. HM 106 states that he engaged in no sexual relationships whilst undercover. He understands that his Operation Hearn interview regarding a possible relationship with an activist was a result of what he describes as a flippant remark in an MI5 file note that he had, quote, probably bedded a potential informant, but had, quote, been warned off by his bosses. HM 106 states he has no clear memory of this person and certainly had no sexual relationship with her, and notes that the Hearn investigation found no evidence to the contrary. He believes that the file note might have arisen from an incident relating to a quite close platonic relationship that he formed with the ex-partner of an activist, who was not an activist herself. They would meet up for drinks, and he would sometimes stay the night at her house in a separate room if he were unable to drive home. Some activists started to refer to her as, quote, Barry's girlfriend, which he claims helped his cover. A reference in an intercepted telephone call to potentially storing items from Ireland at, quote, Barry's girlfriend's place apparently led to a meeting at which Trevor Butler said something like, "You're not going to get us into trouble, are you?" To which he responded, "No, it's nothing like that." HM 106 is unable to recall any specific instance of public disorder or violence and participated in none. While he was once intentionally tripped up by police officers at a demonstration, he does not think this amounted to violence. HM 106 believes that it would have been difficult to gain the sort of information he reported without the use of undercover officers. He has no real idea of what was done with his reports or of their value to policing, but hopes they provided a realistic and fair assessment of the threats posed by groups. HM 106 states that he sometimes engaged in low-level criminality while deployed, and recalls one incident when he acted as a lookout while Spartacus League activists sprayed graffiti on Bow Bridge. He believes it was understood that you could get involved in such activity if necessary to maintain your cover, but that UCOs would certainly not have been allowed to take part in serious crime, nor would they have encouraged others to act unlawfully. In the event of arrest, he thinks they were told not to reveal that they were UCOs and to ring the office straight away. He was never arrested in his cover identity, nor did he appear or participate in criminal proceedings. HM 106 states that he had no concerns for his or his family's welfare and describes how he was given a pager when his wife was pregnant with their second child, which enabled him to be present for his child's birth. He does not believe that his time in the SDS had an impact on his long-term welfare. Around 5 years after he left the SDS, HM 106 recalls that Tony Waite, who was head of the unit at that time, contacted him about the subject of some of his SDS reports and asked whether he stood by the information he provided, which HM 106 confirmed. He believes that this was in relation to a deportation matter, but he cannot be sure. That concludes the summary for these officers. In addition to the witness statements and documents for these two officers, the inquiry is also publishing today documents in relation to HN 356. HN 356 had the cover name Bill Biggs and reported on the International Socialist, which became the SWP during his deployment. Analysis of his documents can be found at pages 225 to 232 of Counsel to the Inquiry's written opening statement for Tranche 1, Phase 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There will now be a break of about a quarter of an hour while the technology is rearranged to permit us to have live evidence. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is now 10:45 a.m., so we shall reconvene at 11 a.m. Thank you.